everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angus Slatton, and I'm the Director of Sales Operations here at PartnerEyes. Today we have Dean Smith, who's the Partnerships Manager for ANZ at Branch. And Branch is the industry-leading mobile measurement and deep linking platform. And we use these guys across a large number of our clients on a global level. But Dean, before we get stuck in, tell us a little bit about yourself, about Branch and how you guys work with fraud and how you prevent it.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thanks for having us, Angus. Very excited about this. As you mentioned, I'm the partnerships manager, and my role is to work with our partners across SEA and ANZ. This includes ad networks, agencies, consultancies, and of course, tech partners like PartnerEyes. When it comes to Branch, you touched on it. We're the leading mobile deep linking and attribution platform globally. What this means is, I guess, in short, we work with the world's leading apps across all verticals, and our goal is to help them improve, customer experiences by delivering seamless user journeys across all channels. Then on the back end, we help clients measure and optimize performance by delivering highly accurate cross-platform and cross-channel attribution. Now, in relation to fraud, because Branch offers attribution for ads, we also need to deal with the multi-billion-dollar industry-wide challenge that is fraud. And the majority of fraud that we see or that Branch helps prevent typically relates to mobile traffic or what we call ad fraud.
I see. Can you detail or explain the different types of fraud that relate to mobile?
Yeah, sure. So, there's a number of different fraud types that we see across mobile or app traffic, but typically the most common types are things like click flooding or spamming, ad stacking, click injection, click farming, or, things like fake devices or device ID fraud.
So you've mentioned some of the fraud types there. Can you explain a little bit further about how that's actually carried out and done?
Yeah, so I think it's important to say, first and foremost, Branch, we believe in, comprehensive fraud protection, that it should be a core part of any attribution offering. So this is why we choose to include our solution by default, for all our customers. Now, we have an entire data science team dedicated to working on fraud, so things can get a little complex, but I'll try to do them justice and do my best at explaining in short, how it works. Now, with that said, essentially Branch automatically blocks attributions from known bad actors, and we send that traffic to what we call our fraud dashboard. So what we do is detect indicators from common fraud types, some of the ones I mentioned earlier, and most importantly, we block fraudulent attribution credit in real time. So simply put, we're able to model what typical behavior should look like when it's, from an ad is clicked or when an install in an event should happen. And if it's fraudulent, we're able to block it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that there are a range of different fraud types. And because of this, Branch has developed a dedicated product and we call that I touched on it earlier, but we call that our Fraud Rule Manager.
The Fraud Rule Manager, that sounds interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it actually works?
Yeah, sure. So the Fraud Rule Manager, that's our dedicated product that we've developed to prevent fraud. And what it does is it gives clients, the power to see, edit, enable or disable specific fraud rules all by themselves. So they're not reliant on us. They're able to get as detailed and as granular with their fraud logic as they like. And essentially they can easily enable or disable any rules at any time. So, we also give our clients the ability to create their own custom rules. So, the client has the flexibility to develop rules associated to fraud, specifically curated for their own business or objectives. Now, I touched on all those common fraud that we know. So because of this, on top of what I just mentioned, Branch, we also have what we call globally enabled rules. And these are things like, suspicious IP or suspicious persona. And these are automatically, enabled for each customer. And then one more thing that's part of the Fraud Rule Manager is essentially, we have our globally recommended blocking rules. And these are very, very important things like device conflict or country conflict, or most importantly, suspicious click to install time. And these are all things that can be easily enabled across any account. So that's sort of what builds out the branch fraud rule manager.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned, common types of fraud. What's the fraud you're seeing most frequently, and has that changed over the last, 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, great question. I think from what I've seen, the most common type of fraud that we typically encounter would be called click injection or click spamming.
Okay, and then for those that aren't familiar with that, are you able to explain what click injection and click spamming is?
Yeah, of course, of course. It's a great question. It was new to me when I entered the industry, of course. But essentially, what click injection or click spamming is it occurs when someone tries to artificially manufacture or inject a click, and that happens right at the point just before an app opens. Now, generally, the aim is for whoever is doing this to claim the install, when it should really belong to maybe another ad network or an organic source that drove that install or event.
So who does this affect? And why would someone actually use click injection?
Yeah, great. I guess like most ad fraud, it's devised for financial gain. So in this case, the bad actor or the fraudster, they're looking to commit fraud and they're trying to claim credit for an install that really shouldn't be attributed to them. So for example, an advertiser might be working with affiliates or partners, and they might be paying out on a cost per install basis. Now, someone would use click injection, and essentially what they're trying to do is steal credit and the payout for that install with no associated cost back to the fraudster. So essentially people are trying to steal what belongs to, I guess, other advertisers or networks.
Interesting. And is this a new trend, or has it been around a while?
No, not at all. From what I know, in terms at least related to the mobile and app world, click injection has been around since the very start. So with that in mind, what I can say is that, we're seeing this type of ad fraud, increase on a day by day basis. So especially as things like, there's a big resurgence in the affiliate and partner space, we're going to see this type of fraud naturally increase as well.
Okay, and then following up on that, what's the kind of scale in fraud you're actually seeing in the mobile space and the wider app industry?
Yeah, well, essentially, it's hard to put a number on the level of fraud we see, like the exact percentage or anything like that. There's just too many variables around what is fraud and what isn't. But what I can say that, as I mentioned just before, we're seeing fraud increasing on a day-by-day basis. And to be honest, this isn't really a surprise. As we see users move away from what was desktop to mobile and now from web to app, naturally, the fraud associated with this is going to, I guess, follow. So the scale of fraud is only ever going to increase.
Okay, thanks for that. And, I think what the users want to hear is advice. That's probably why they're watching today. So what is your best advice when it comes to preventing fraud, mainly around the affiliate and partnership space?
Yeah, great question. I think personally, when it comes to fraud, at least in terms of mobile, we see generally the same trends across all channels, whether it's paid ads or it is affiliates and partners or social, you name it. So there's no big differentiation in there. What's important to understand is that fraudsters are ultimately out to make money. And this is going to have bad ramifications, not just for the advertiser, but also the publishers, the networks, technology providers like, say, Partnerize or even Branch. Now, ultimately, with all this happening, it can lead to a constant circle of blame as who's responsible or who should look after the fraud. Now, my advice would be to ensure that as a marketer or as an advertiser, that you choose your technologies that align to your own goals for your business. So, in relation to Branch, as I mentioned earlier, we believe that fraud detection should be a core part of any attribution offering. So this is why we choose to sort of include it by default for all our customers and not charge as an additional add-on. And this really relates back to Branch's goals. So our pricing model at Branch is based on active users instead of, say, install counts. This means that, as a company, our goals are aligned with our clients, and we don't need to charge extra for something like fraud protection, whereas I speak related to our industry compared to a number of legacy attribution providers, they have their pricing set by the number of installs they measure. So naturally, if these installs are marked as fraudulent, the overall sort of count of installs will reduce if they are, and this might affect the price paid back to the vendor, and it can create a real conflict of interest. So realistically, if you are serious about reducing fraud, I think the best advice would be to, do your homework and think about, consider the companies you choose to partner with and how they approach fraud themselves. And then essentially going one step further, really understand like what constitutes or how their fraud technology is really built. Because, I know in our space, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Angus, our fraud technology is not built the same as our competitors. So as a marketer, I would say it's really important to do your homework.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, look, Dean, thank you so much for that. I found it extremely interesting and informative. Obviously, we work quite closely together as well. And today we've heard about Branch, the kind of fraud that you actually prevent. We've spoken about how fraud relates to specifically, mobile devices, and especially in APAC, mobile is huge, especially in the fraud area. The fraud rule manager, very interesting to hear more about that, and I'll be sure to ping you afterwards for a bit more information. And interesting to hear what that actually means for advertisers and the kind of info they can get and the control that they have, especially around the click injection, click spamming, and obviously the best advice you've had on that. So, Dean Smith, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Angus. It was great to chat.